Welcome back. This is the second video in my beginner build series where we go over how to make a build as a beginner against an opponent who's probably also a beginner, maybe an intermediate player, and yeah, how do we make a good build? Great question. Thank you for asking. So to start off with, for the second video, we're going to look at dwarves. And yeah, so let's think this through. What is like a really a good way of starting with dwarves? Well, let's say a good way of starting is you can't really go wrong with bringing like two demon slayers. This isn't a lot of people dislike this style when they play against it, but I think there's something there's a good reason for that, which is it's effective. So you actually don't need to bring any of this stuff. It does make these units better. There are alternate versions of this, but some form of what they would call hero hammer. Another very common way of doing this is, say, with a lord as the and you can actually bring some of these items that are pretty good. You can bring a lord, you can bring like runesmiths, but let's say for the sake of this video, for just simplicity, we're gonna go with the triple slayer. It's super cheap. It's very good AP. So if you expect your opponent to bring like a large lord, these three are really dangerous to fight as bringing a single entity. And then for our secondary, the style that I'm going to recommend here is that we're going to go wide with correlers. I think this approach is fairly easy to play in the sense that, all right, we're not going to be, we're going to be like kind of relying on our shooting. These things have pretty good AP. So see, they have like a pretty high ratio of armor piercing damage. So you can actually shoot these guys at practically any target, and if they can shoot for long enough, they'll do damage. And then the second part of this is a dwarf warrior frontline. Dwarf warriors have charged defense versus large. So if your opponent has bringing a lot of large things, you just sit them and let them take the charge. Now, I'm going to recommend something a little unusual here. And then I'll just mention too, why not Rangers? Rangers are also very good. But because this is a beginner's build, you can see that the armor is much higher for correlers. And so that makes them a little harder to get rid of. And that can be really effective in some situations. So Slayers, I'm going to recommend that you start with Slayers because I think the hardest part about playing Dwarves is to have your Slayers in the right position at the right time. Now, to round this off, I'm going to add a Longbeard. So you might be wondering, why not Longbeards with great weapons? Well, Longbeards are almost always better than Longbeards' great weapons, and the same thing with regular Dwarf Warriors as opposed to their great weapon kin. It's very rare that just the extra melee defense won't be more useful. And remember, we're relying on the correlers to kill everything here, so that's sort of where our DPS is coming from. Then, basically, the secondary is going to look like this. Miners with blasting charges are incredibly effective because they have Vanguard, and because they have Vanguard, they get to the battlefield much quicker. It's hard not to get good use out of these. In fact, we can even make this the Ekron's Miners, because Ekron's Miners have 3 blasting charges, and usually these units can get their value back almost regardless of what they throw their blasting charges at, as long as the blasting charges hit. But they're also a very annoying unit, so your opponent will have to like allocate resources to deal with those. Now, in terms of Slayers, you always want Slayers. Slayers are very good. they're like your best answer. And in fact, let's do 2 sets of Slayers. The Giant Slayer, why the Giant Slayer is here? Because it has the armor piercing. So if your opponent, a lot of times you can get away with just using the regular Slayers, but because they have armor piercing, it's much more advantageous when your opponent brings really armored things. Now, one unit that we probably always want at least one of, even for a beginner, these now have, they don't have firewall moving anymore, so they're a little harder to get their value. Now I'm going to recommend you bring one. The thing about gyrocopters is they're very good at killing elite infantry and elite cavalry, because their missile strength is pretty much completely armor-piercing damage. So if you just fly this over to, like, I don't know, let's say a chosen unit, it will do so much damage to the chosen unit. So your opponent almost has to have an answer to this. If your opponent has no answer to a gyrocopter, you can probably get away with one. Now, for the last part of the army, what I'm going to recommend here is a Doomseeker. This one is very good for killing infantry, and we don't really have much infantry killing power outside of the Corlers. And then the rest, I'll probably recommend a couple Longbeards, and then let's see if there's anything else. Let's see, anything else that I'd recommend? Let's say I'm gonna recommend the Grim Delvers, because the Grim Delvers have really high damage and stock, so it's pretty easy to like surprise if your opponent brings like a huge lord. This is one of the really good answers to killing a huge lord. The last bit for the last little bit of the army, let's see if we can balance the spend, and then I'll talk about some of these and why I don't recommend them to beginners. Let's see, maybe we turn this guy into a regular, and then we can bring a miner. Miners are pretty bad. They have their uses as chaff and like filling in gaps in your ranks. But for a beginner, I'm not going to recommend you bring too many miners, because they will lose you games. They're very easy to kill. So why do I not recommend bringing artillery? Because you have to defend artillery. So using artillery is very map specific. A lot of times you might benefit from having like a single cannon that you can sit in your backfield and have Slayers protect it. But for the sake of a beginner, I'm going to recommend that you you bring your units and you keep them all together. That's the name of the game with Dwarves. Everything stays together. So I'm not recommending you put Vanguard units for an early capture of the points, because that's kind of like a more intermediate and advanced strategy. In this, when you play Dwarves, you need to always be thinking, okay, I have a formation, I'm staying in formation. If you can't play a formation on a map, because like, for example, Borderlow Landing is a very difficult it's very difficult to hold the center and a side point and your other side point, or just two of those. So if you can't play a solid formation, don't play Dwarves. Dwarves are very difficult once you get spread out, and that's how you lose value. But this army, I've seen all the way up to like very high level players play something like this, and I think this is also like one of the easiest strategies. So Frontline of Dwarf Warriors, one Longbeard to fill in any holes after the initial engagement, and then Slayers to hold the back line, and then you want to be moving your Longbeards or your Miners, whatever units you summon next, you want to be filling in your gaps. And then a couple units, these 3 units are these 4 units are all just in case units for specific purposes. So you have these in your back pocket if you need them, but the overall idea of the army is we're going to be using these units to capture points, lots of capture weight, lots of armor, and then our shooting to do our DPS, and then our hero squad to also provide capture weight, but then be some poke against big monsters. So yeah, thank you for watching video number 2, and we will see you next time for Tzeentch. So bye for now.